Hi guys, Joe Whitcomb back here, part 2 of adult survivors of aversive childhood experiences. I wasn't watching my time on the last one, so went over. So I wanted to finish this segment up with what we can begin to do. And we'll get into that in a minute. I wanted to just cover a few more things to really begin to take a deeper dive into the trauma, right? And naming and taming the dragons when they get you hanging, dangling over the cliff. And, I see this all the time with people. And again, someone who has also climbed that mountain with no oxygen and little support, this is an opportunity for you to call out and use this time of the quarantine to do your deeper level work. And it's okay. I'm here. Give me a call, 310-560-0726, so we can begin to heal together. This is a good time for all of us when things have slowed down, and we can do the self-reflection. We can have that tranquility and practice our meditation and practice our prayers and practice our time of taking this time of growing. And I'm reminded of a verse in the Bible in Joel 2:25, and it says, what the locusts have destroyed and devoured these years and years, God said, I want to restore, repair, and there will be no more shame. Because this is really about our shame story, our collective shame story, and that those pain points, and that's a lot of the work I do. The reason I do this work is because of my own, that relationships do bring me the greatest amount of joy, but they can also tend to be the greatest source of pain and suffering at the same time. But doing this work, I can hold my feet to the fire, to the path, to the integrity, and as we do this work together, our curriculums. And the curriculum is ours to really discover and find out. And we do this work together as a team, as we leapfrog up the mountain together. And hopefully this will help you get on a good course for 2020 and making this decade the most powerful you've ever had. But getting back to just talking really directly today and openly about abuse, about aversive childhood experiences, and making sense of all this. Again, because unfortunately as children we receive an internal psychological payoff when we believe that the abuse is our fault, right? That false sense of power, right, that we talked about in the last episode, and where, as children, we can let that unfairness and danger of the violence shatter us, or the abandonment, where we can go into that swirl of feeling shattered, that losing ourselves, that kind of a withdrawal, like an opiate drug, when we feel that loss of connection and feeling frightened or angry or sad or helpless or disconnected or innocent. We can get caught up in that and get into our woundology. And that story of the wounding is what we lead with, and I see this all the time. And when we talk about it a lot, but it doesn't ever get closure, it doesn't ever close the loop, and we stay stuck and frozen, right? There's nothing wrong with this situation, but this is happening to us for a good reason. This is happening so we can rewire some of those rusty wires, because the thing is, the abuse you did not deserve. That wasn't happening because you deserved it or because you provoked it. It's not why you're put on this earth to endure such things. There's really nothing out of the ordinary about, this. These are the statements that we make to justify and rationalize and minimize that internal psychological payoff, right? To stay to kind of be able to stay connected into a relationship, as painful as it is. But this is also maybe where we need to de-invest and stop going to an empty well, and so we don't have to continue the abuse in our life. But children, as a child, we're doing the best that we could to make sense out of this abuse, neglect. We had, again, by maybe feeling guilty and taking 100% responsibility for everything, because, we're holding on to that illusion that we are in control of when we feel like we're truly out of control. And that illusion of power seems better than acknowledging that that we don't have any power at all. And so the psychological, pseudo-logic, let's say, kind of helps quell some of the fear or hurt or rage or terror or confusion, sadness, rationalizing them into a deep freeze, deep frozen. And these child's sense of guilt and responsibility, this is useful, to the abusive parent who believes he isn't abusive. You're the problem for pointing out the problem. So this is a child who's, again, if you're in that situation, who's been forcing them into being abusive. This non-protective adults want the child, you, to bear the guilt so they don't have to face the harm the neglect is causing, or the hurt or harm, pain and suffering. So the dance of that violent family begins, and children are responsible then for adults' behavior. This is what happens. You're made responsible for your adults' thoughts, feelings, tasks, everything. And adults, we've learned, are responsible for nothing. Adults are responsible for nothing, which is not true. That's the lie. Because when we're faced with these random, senseless abuse, a child begins to think to himself or herself that we are inherently unlovable, right? Unaccepted, wrong, believing yourself to be guilty or responsible or in control of others' hurtful behavior. That can be a tenacious habit or a pattern of thought, habit of action. Because many survivors would begin to deal with any overwhelming experience like physical illness or abandonment by a friend or spouse, academic or job demands, by comforting ourselves with the illusion that we're in fact in control and to blame. Right. That's an enormous amount of energy that's sapped by this irrational guilt that I'm always to be blamed. I'm 100% responsible for 100% of everything that goes on out there. That external locus of control. Because really, do we as survivors, we see ourselves as so powerful over the good in our own lives. The author, being the author in charge, taking charge of our own love and taking charge of, that just seems like an impossible thing, because what would happen if we did take charge? What would happen if you did speak up as a child? Where would you go? What would you do? You get knocked down. You get there was no way, because our parents' constant projection has left its mark. Its indelible mark on our heart, or like a tattoo in our brain, a tattoo in our heart, a tattoo in our body. Like it's there. It's that constant projection, like a branding. And as survivors, we get convinced of this inherent sense of worthlessness and inadequacy. And as I talk to people who are out there, you may be one of those people that are praying for worthiness. Because that too is the lie. Because we don't pray for worthiness, because as Brene Brown says, hey, we're wired for struggle, we're imperfect, but we're worthy of love and belonging. So we don't pray for worthiness, we pray through worthiness, because you have worth. And so to look to other people, places, things for our salvation, right? Looking outside of ourselves for that salvation, right? That hero, that rescuer, that savior, right? So a lot of us, so we don't feel that loss or abandonment, we become that rescuer for others. while at the same time abandoning ourselves. And only when we have that perfect intimate partner that, or our dream house or a public recognition at work or whatever that is, we're going to have that sense of being redeemed. Or if we rescued somebody else, or we conquered that one compulsion or impulsion, and now we're going back, because of course anything so powerful to save their lives might also destroy their lives too. Again, you're living by a certain sword, you die by that sword, which brings the survivor back full circle to your original feelings of powerlessness and being responsible for all the pain in the world. And we feel that sense of we're inept at enjoying our own happiness and joy. We're just incapable of fully experiencing it because we're so detached. And we can't connect out there until we connect inside, internally, and identify the internal storms and the pain and discomfort. Because that fantasy as a coping mechanism can also be our weakness, right? When too often fantasies become more real than the relationships themselves, the idealization. We idealize it and value, then devalue and reject and dispose of, because we're constantly rejecting and protecting and resisting, which persists because these survivors, we fantasize a lot about what other people think or feel about them. It's like we're that scared little kid in the corner there, scanning the other person's nervous system, trying to code and decode every facial expression, every movement, every word, everything that's being said. So if something happens and you feel that trigger, danger, 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 the story, adding, subtracting, all this meaning, and that meaning has something to protect, all right? So that translating and interpreting everything, that brown squirrely thing in the grass that you're coding and decoding isn't a stick, it's a snake, and every brown squirrely thing that you decode is going to attack and is dangerous. Right? So trauma takes control precedence. It's kind of like, and it influences our ways of organizing in our mind and what goes on out in the world, And survivors who if we haven't fared well in life, tend to think a lot of times in these overgeneralizations, these sweeping generalizations. People are either good or bad. There's no technicolor or gray area in between. Everything is always or never, right? And there's a long ways between now and never, right? With no room for doesn't matter much. Because in contrast, some of us survivors have thinking that is highly compartmentalized, and in that all or nothing, black and white rigidity, that wounded child, that adaptive child that compartmentalizes everything and keeps it separate. Because children, they simply don't have the cognitive development. As children, we didn't have that life experience for clear thinking, really, in the face of trauma. All that's occurring simultaneously. But here's in contrast here, right? It's children simply do not have the ability for us to think through these thinking errors. Again, that reflects our best attempt to comprehend the incomprehensible, kind of going back to what I was talking about with the calculus problem, trying to comprehend the incomprehensible or comprehensible when the truth wasn't offered or even allowed. So the first step to recovery then, as we get into this, is to examine, challenge, and change these old ways of thinking about trauma, and better understanding from this trauma-informed relationship psychotherapy method I've developed to understand how trauma affects your attachment styles, your imprints, your memory, your nervous system, your relationships, your emotions, the sensations that you feel in your body, all those things co-occurring. And the really good news is that all that is mirrored back as a way for us to heal, but we need, you and I need to talk and get through some of these challenges So the goal of that is sorting through the lies of the mind, and also to learn to take the abuse less personally and maybe feel safer. So by us looking back, okay, not to live in the past, but the past does get reenacted in the present. So we're understanding how we can be powerfully secure adults with powerful adult minds, so we can be more objectively measuring the powerlessness of that traumatized child who had to learn to accommodate and adjust, and that wounded child, the accommodation of that, so that we're able to think more clearly, but that may not be the entire answer again, but it is an excellent and necessary beginning for us to think differently about that. As Emerson wrote, okay, it's the oyster who mends its shell with pearls. But unlike oysters, we're not solitary creatures, right? We're not on an island. We mend one another as well as ourselves. And again, the pearls of wisdom, and that irritant is like a piece of grain in an oyster that, is the perfect blessing and just the right gift. So pearls of wisdom help us to take that next step from the known to the unknown, the certainty to the uncertainty, heal in the company of other people and feeling the effects of the trauma while we hold on to our life rafts here as we sit in the raft of truth in an ocean of grace, fierce grace, the unforced rhythm of grace that can flow within and between us as we heal. And feelings begin in the body, not just the mind, not in the mind. A lot of us think, well, I'm feeling it in my mind. No, if you really slow it down, do the play-by-play as we go through this, we feel that in our body first. The body keeps score, right? So think about the next time you have a trigger, where do you feel it in your chest? Like when I get triggered and I start feeling it, it's exactly like this red-hot lava dragon with fiery breath in my chest and down my arms, this river of fire and lava going down in my head, and I disassociate and I run away. Typically, that's my typical response, is to not. I will only tend to fight back when I'm pursued, and then I will lean in and set a harsh boundary typically. But I'm getting better at that. I hope you guys are too. I can tend to be the exploding doormat. Hey, guy, please everybody, just to make everybody happy, being the rescuer. But then, it gets to be too much and poof, explode, right? The exploding doormat. Anybody else out there? So thinking comes much more easily to me now. It's still a big risk to feel. If I ever started to cry, I'd cry a river sometimes. If I ever felt the terror of it all, I'd probably disintegrate into nothingness, and that's okay. I went through a group one time, and I was talking to the men, and they were going around saying, "Who are you?" And people would say different things, and they came to me, and I don't know, I said something like, "I'm a connector." And everyone just shook their head like it didn't land. And they were right, because I wasn't connected. I wasn't connected to me. And the only thing I could say was, "I'm nothing." And my friend, who is also facilitating the group, said to me, "That's the perfect place to be, Joe. Nothing." Because God, he said, when God spoke, he said, from nothing, he created everything. The other side of nothing is everything. Everything is on the other side of nothing. A tabula rasa, a blank slate, a clean slate, something that I can take and clear out the debris from the past and the constraints of the past, so you too can, be okay to say, "I'm nothing," not from a place of worthlessness, but a place of every day, today, I can clear that out, I can start anew and rethink and re-feel and reconnect to my body and everything around me, so that I can truly have a way of relating to myself and to others, right? Again, because this is really super important. that we think about how these coping strategies, whether have truly impacted you. And I know the intent is one thing, but the effect is another. And so we have to look at the effects of the intention that has been protecting us for so long, which actually is, again, a double-edged sword. Live by that sword, die by that sword. And you have to ask yourself, and be okay. If you feel like crying, cry. If you feel like laughing, laugh. If you feel like, shouting, shout. Find a safe place to do that and to connect. Again, you can call me, 310-560-0726, or email me, and I'll send you an email on the 7 trauma loops so we can begin to identify what those trauma loops are together. And the more you know, and you can look at this stuff from 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 feet without the judgment, things happen. Again, feelings begin in the body, not in the mind. And I talk to a lot of survivors, and they a lot of times will say, I know what happened wasn't my fault, but I still feel somewhat unlovable and damaged, like it was my fault. Because children don't innately know how to repress our spontaneous responses, right? Again, children learn what they live what they learn, so they've been taught. And troubled parents are perhaps the best teachers of all, because there's 3 ironclad rules in every abusive home. Don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. And to break any of them means risking this rejection or punishment. And that don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, this double bind. And let me explain what a double bind is to you. So, and again, when it comes to trauma and survive all this, it doesn't matter if you're drowning at 1 feet, 7 feet, or 21 feet. You're drowning, right? You're drowning. But there is a difference of when you start to learn how to swim, or when you start trying to get back to this, if you're at 1 feet, 7 feet, or 21 feet. If you're at 7 feet, listen, that makes it harder to reach. But to reach it, we will, so you can get back to shore and get to peace and find that secure base, that sound space, that space. But the double bind is kind of like this. Think of it like this: don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Okay, and when we break any of those, means we're going to be, a rejection or abandonment or punishment, and more hurt and harm in some way. So imagine you have a teacher, right, or a parent, right? A parent shows the child the stick, and the child says, "That's a stick," acknowledging that that's a stick. That's a stick. And the parent strikes the child. And then the parent shows the stick again, and the child says that is not a stick. That's not real. It's not a stick. And the child gets struck again, or abandoned. And then the child ignores it, like doesn't feel it, doesn't see it, doesn't talk about it, like it doesn't exist. And the parent still strikes the child with a stick. So what are you supposed to do? What are you to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do now that you couldn't do as a child to up-level that communication and those boundaries? What can you do? Where do you have the power and freedom to choose something different right now that you couldn't choose back then to solve that calculus problem? And to go, okay, what am I supposed to learn here? But maybe deeper here is, what am I not willing to learn here? And that maybe what I'm not willing to learn here is that I do have the power and freedom to choose to walk up to that parent now, grab the stick, and break it. Now we have another way. We have another way. We can break that pattern, that stick, that attachment injury, that wound. Because the abusive home of don't talk, don't trust, don't feel kept us frozen, and that's the double bind, that's the cage, the velvet trap. If you close your fist tight and you grip onto it really tight and you don't let go, inside you're protecting it, but it's a trap. It's a trap. Because one of the few predictable aspects, let's say, of a violent family is the unpredictability of your parents' responses. My dad was, both parents actually were very unpredictable, and we had 4 businesses, and we were around each other 24/7. And so, of course, the work stress, the business stress, money stress, chore stress, going to school, work, go to school, work, all that stuff, But that unpredictability of that parent's response, again, go back and watch that still face experiment with the baby and the mother, and watch that and see, because here's what happens. Every time the child cries, they're going to get a different response. And soon you realize that it's unsafe to cry, because either you get neglected or you get a spanking, or some children were shaken, and then after a while, and it keeps we keep our feelings to ourselves, and perhaps we loathe spontaneity because it causes so much trouble, right? So if you kind of shut down any kind of curiosity because you didn't have parents in your life who were spontaneous or curious or safe, right? So we kind of shut that process down, and as young children, we offer our feelings to adults as gifts, saying, as currency of love, right, in exchange for intimacy, right? And we trade that authentic true self, just to survive again, for intimacy and connection, belonging, to stay safe. Now, all they can do is be close to adults, is to offer their feelings here. So when our feelings are ignored or rejected or as wrong or bad or troublesome or sick or crazy or stupid or too much, in that feeling of being rejected, or the young mind reasons, since my feelings aren't acceptable, I must be unacceptable too. Do you see where the truth can go? Because beyond teaching children and adults, my whole life, mostly working with adults, to recognize and articulate our emotions, or that underlying, that deep ocean of that undercurrent of waves and waterways and all these things that we want to be able to express, these high tides, low tides, rip tides, all those things. And when that earth shook and a tsunami came, and you didn't know what to do with that. When children do not learn how to do this, we become overwhelmed by this flood, experiencing this emotions as floods, getting flooded, and we loathe to fear or loathe our own feelings. And there's this part of us as adults from abusive homes can also become pain avoidant or love avoidant, or just avoidant of anything that may feel like discomfort. And so again, survivors attempt to control people and events around them so we'll never have to feel pain again. That's been my greatest, that was my superpower. I could just numb everything out. And we train people either with our very porous boundaries or our harsh, rigid boundaries, or our boundaries and and sometimes I don't even call them boundaries, they're more like rules to protect ourselves. Because what's most tragic about pain avoidant behavior is, again, that's a defense against something that's already happened and cannot be undone. Can't change the past. The past, present, future. Past is about shame and about guilt and feeling all that stuff from the past that we've internalized because shame makes us believe, is so corrosive, it makes us believe that we can't change or our situation can't change. And we can't really live fully in this present until, we have a perspective of the past that's more healthy. But sometimes, being preoccupied and defensive about this pain, waiting in the future, where we kind of catapult it or future trip it, and just, the future is just another distraction from addressing the real pain in the past, in the present, here and now. So what are you running away from? What are you hiding from? I mean, we've been hiding from love and connection and for a long time. It goes back, think of the Garden of Eden, eating from the tree of good and bad, right? So the story goes, and Adam and Eve hid between the proverbial fig leaves, the mask, hiding from love. And they were hiding with fear and shame. And the shame, these two master emotions, fear and shame. Shame is the past. And most men take on the shame, and women take on more of the anxiety and the fear about the future, and begin to control both aspects. And so living fully in the present, authentically, and healing is where we can begin to transmute and transform and use the content of all these things in our life to join in the truth. And intimacy is that, again, to be intimate is to risk pain. Again, there's no guarantees. There's no guarantee. But you can choose, another path, another practice, another way, and choose healthier relationships, choose healthier people, right? Finding safe people that have your back no matter what, because all that's co-occurring in that moment. Okay? So survivors attempt to flee from feelings about having been abused, from these normal reactions to abnormal situations, and that trauma, again, can take control precedence. It's the woundology. It's a thing that we lead our life through out of our fear of being wounded again, because that situation was life-threatening in the past. And sometimes as survivors, we mistakenly believe that to experience those feelings today would also be life-threatening and would bring on an emotional breakdown or falling apart, like shattering, like it is to death. So we don't understand that the breakdown has already happened, and now that nervous system, the circuitry of the nervous system is in this when their feelings are, when we get preempted by shame. And what blocks that? We jump up into grandiosity and making it better rather than feeling what we need to feel, right? So important here. Because, again, when you're ready for this, so survivors, we can afford to look that death squarely, that dragon squarely in the face, when we have people who will stand by you, who will take a stand for your transformation, to get back to knowing who are you and where are you going, what are you standing for, what are you fighting for, championing your higher purpose. What is it right now for you as this coronavirus is going on, and all this time that you have to think about your past, your present, future, taking this time to really connect to yourself so you can thaw out, right? And when it's finally safe enough, as the survivor, we're able to remember the memories and feelings and feel the feelings about the trauma, feel what we need to feel, such as the thawing out. And, when we get frozen, the thaw is the second chance, an emotional redemption, reincarnation. A better word would be kind of when we raised back to life again. Why can't I think of that word? Jesus was, the resurrection. There you go, resurrection. That resurrection, right? And then we can really feel the thawing out, and still the first sensations that have been repressed or voided, all of the ones that life can feel like a tidal wave. All those things you've been holding back. Because when we're ready, the thoughts and feelings can return. So in response to what's been uncovered here, then we can often feel great anger at the betrayal itself, and the injustice and the randomness of the violence, and the unpredictability, and understanding our own need for proximity and a safe haven, a secure base connection. Because then we can really start healing. Because underneath that anger is a terror. Because the anger is secondary. The primary underneath all that, the terror, the helplessness, or the powerlessness, the shame, it's more difficult to experience than the anger that may be there. Because maybe it wasn't as bad as I remember, but, or we say that sometimes, or maybe I'm just exaggerating or making it worse than it is. But that can go on for a long time. But with help, and I'm here to help, you can call me 310-560-0726 or email me, and I'll send you a free 7 trauma loops at joe@rebuildingconnection.com. So the survivor, you'll be able to eventually accept that the trauma was as bad as you know it was, right? Not to minimize it, because it did matter, it hurt, it was wrong, it was painful. Will not allow us profound sadness to follow, which is part of the grief process, because this is grieving the loss of the innocence, grieving the loss of a child, and the grief pattern cycle is, denial, anger, right? Depression, despair. Those can kind of go one or before the other, right? And then eventually, the bargaining, the wish that the child who is different, and we get stuck in that woundiology and that frozenness, the woundology that we keep living and leading out from our life. And we want to try something different here, right? But that profound sadness follows here, and that compassion, acceptance of that poor me, and the mourning of the losses of the trauma that created eventually will lead to your resolution, your redemption. Because when the losses engendered by trauma are fully mourned, when you're able to truly grieve the loss of the ideal and get into an acceptance, self-acceptance, forgiveness, the trauma loses its power over the survivor. So instead of the emotional breakdown we fear, as survivors, we can experience an emotional breakthrough and break through the upper limit barriers, being able to complete the grieving process, and again, meaning divorcing the trauma from our sense of identity and self-worth, and that your worth is greater than you could ever have thought or imagined, and we don't have to buy into that same story that we've always bought into. So just some thoughts here, as you go on throughout your day. We're just focusing on our curriculum and doing what we can for ourselves during this time to take back our power and freedom, take charge of our time here that we have. And also just reminding ourselves that, most people are trying, we are trying to regulate our nervous system from the outside. And you know what? And that is appropriate. That is appropriate and normal, and this is really critical, especially in infant development. As babies, we attune to our external environment. And if the big people in our environment are safe, right, we feel safe inside. If it isn't safe, we don't feel safe inside. As we grow old, or we grow, we begin to attract into our lives this ongoing vibration of our own nervous system, into that it could go into more. For instance, if we are more hypervigilant, okay, notice what you're noticing. What are you attracting more of? That mirror or require hypervigilance, right? You walk into through the forest, and if you're scanning and looking for evidence of all those brown squiggly things being snakes, you're going to be jumping around a lot and maybe never leave the house. The bear's always in the house, right? But for those of us who feel challenged a lot, it's important to understand why we keep attracting these stressful, traumatic, repeating events, or even certain people into our lives. Like moths to a flame, we just dive into it. Most people think that it's our bad luck, maybe bad karma, it's the karmic shuffle, or perhaps it's someone else's fault that, our path or practice feels so hard. We might look for a target to blame for our misery, but then we just slowly slip into this victim seat again, and that we're trying to climb out of. And so here we are, if we investigate really deeply about this, and we start to realize and recognize that we're attracting that type of vibration and these patterns back into our lives for a reason. And that's to repair and update this old hard drive. Thus, it's to reboot your relationship is to reboot. So in other words, if we catch on here, we use that unsafe environment or maybe other people's limitations or lacks as a wake-up call to begin for us to seek this higher ground, because we realize it's hurting us. Okay, and the developmental task then in that moment is for us all to get back into the driver's seat and renovate and retrain the rusty wires from the inside out. It's not an outside job. It's an inside job. And so together, I think during this process, we can find people and environments that are safe, that we can hold us with love and respect through this growth period. And then during this time, and over the long haul, people who are running maybe a different, higher vibration, whatever you want to call that, energy than us, right? We can attune to that too and find those safe people. But here's the thing to remember. This is important. They don't find us. Those people don't find us until we take responsibility for our way. And I've had to do that over and over and over again and go to people and just say, hey, this is scary for me to talk about, but I'm going to do it anyways because I got to look my worst to grow the most. And I'm going to keep growing and try to be as authentic as I can. And because then the sun comes out, right, and our vision gets wider and we can hold on to more, we can contain more, we can see more, we can feel more, we can do more, we can have, and having passed through this and this hero's journey out of the known to the unknown and back to, we get to pass through this and we get to stand stronger in ourselves, and we're more whole and we're more able to get through. And now we have our nervous system upgrade, our upload, our reboot, if you will, of our relationships and everything. So again, guys, I know these are kind of scary times out there, right? And you're not alone. I hope this podcast, this is part 2 of part 1. If you missed part 1, go back to part 1. Kind of lays down a lot of the foundation here. I'm trying to keep these podcasts a lot shorter. And please write, email, text. If you need to call me, want to talk, 310-560-0726. Or you can email me. I'll send you the 7 trauma loops, part of an upcoming book. And that's, and then just share with your friends, share, you know what to do. I'm not here to, you could, if you would like, if you find these helpful, I would super appreciate you sharing with your family, friends, and making some comments. All right, take care, and make this your best day. And again, everybody stay safe and sound out there. Take care. Bye-bye.